Right, what's up YouTube? Looks like we're online. Oh, let me close some windows. Interesting. Cool. So today's plan is to continue going over the technological society. So from some feedback from you all, Reaper says my voice is low. Is it better? Can you hear me? I think. Do I just move the microphone closer? I got the audio level turned up, so it should be okay. If it's alright, I'll just try to physically move it closer, and then if there's problems I could adjust later. Cool. Yeah, so this stream, I think I'm going to start trying to do a little bit different strategy. With the past streams, I got some feedback that too much time was being spent reading the text. So I think that was good feedback. I completely agree that, yes, stuff could be much more engaging if it's more conversational and stuff, especially because I'm assuming most people watching this don't have the text or the book right in front. See, Reaper says, do you have it showing top chat or live chat? Because I already said it was better. Oh man, I got a good pro tip there. I had it on top chat, but I've changed it to live chat. Now I'm surprised that there was actually a difference there, because I think right now, just starting here, Reaper, you're the only bro joining us today at the start of the stream. So kind of surprising that took a bit, but that's alright. Okay, so let's see, launching into this topic, let's see what preliminary things do we have to talk about. I was thinking about, so this whole stream I started, the first topic I was discussing was the metaverse, and this how, in more or less few words, I could say the metaverse stuff has not been surprising to me at all. Because we could look at recent memory. So I started by talking about how these games have appeared in like RPG video games. A lot of things that people my age, so I'm like millennial generation, but also younger Zoomers, and then the of course, to go older in the generations, the Gen X, even the Boomers. Games and all these things are everywhere, and growing up, especially people that come from maybe middle-class families, live in the suburbs or cities, games and stuff have been really exciting for us, and have been very informative on our culture, ideas, like what sort of dreams or visions of the future might people have, and a lot of this entertainment, various TV shows, movies, games, and books, like we're looking at books today. These have all helped inform our ideas about stuff, but very seldom do I think people look into the origins or the history of where these ideas they have. They're given, of course, as a kid, you're learning to read, you're learning to write. It takes a while to even get a basic idea of the mainstream narrative, so to speak, about what's going on. So having learned that, and then like me, I've gone to graduate school, so sometimes I forget how much school I've been to, but I've been to a lot of school. So for me, like looking at sources and kind of digging into stuff is a pretty natural thing to do. But I understand that this is not the case for everybody, nor should it be. I don't think everybody has time to be a nerd in the same way. That's why a lot of other people have accomplished much more in other areas that people might regard as more important than I have. But here I am, sitting in my room making a stream with you all, because I was the nerd who read the books that people told me to read, even in school. So good to be here. All right, couple comments. So Reaper says, I realize in the future people won't say they had bad luck. They'll say the algos don't like them. Okay, good transition here, Reaper. So just a couple ideas. The first point I would like to bring up is, and I'm going to kind of invent a term here because I don't know if there is a widespread term for this. I'll call the term probabilistic thinking. Let me just pull up a thing that I could write on here. Probabilistic language would probably fit too. So I'm sure if you search this up that there have been people who have talked about this general topic, but we'll make up our own theory. Probabilistic language. So what do I mean by this? Just how we talk about like the past, the future, various stuff. I've noticed that the technical, scientific, whatever you want to call this way of speaking is very common to us. So, for example, if you were talking about like the chance that it will rain, something like that, and then we're all used to looking at stochastic language. Reaper puts up. So I think that's probably the more big brain sounding one. Okay, so probabilistic stochastic language. So for example, we might talk about like the chance that it will rain. So why are we talking about chances that it will rain? Why not just go outside and look and see how the weather is? Yet I think oftentimes the way in which we're talking about the weather is like checking the weather forecast, checking out the rates. Of course, we have full jobs. Like I got a friend who might be listening to this stream who's interested in becoming an actuary. So these are people who, among other things, calculate rates and stuff, which people get injured and die and stuff and make insurance claims. I think I've heard a moniker. This might be for economics, but like the dismal science for economics, something like that. What other examples of probabilistic language? So Reaper brings up there's a concept now called stochastic terrorism. Okay, yeah, so this whole fear and terror, this is also a big idea. And I'll relate this to a security and insurance. So a lot of the times this probabilistic language stuff comes up in the context of people saying, should you reasonably or not reasonably be afraid of something? So somebody might say, oh yeah, you shouldn't be afraid of that. There's only a 0.007 chance that you will, I don't know, a jet engine will fall on your head as you walk out your door. So really, life is just a roll of the dice, but your odds are pretty good. So that would be an example of stochastic language. Oh, another funny term that I've heard nerds say is they'll talk about the so-called random number gods. So in MMORPGs, or a lot of video games, the way that the games will calculate all sorts of things. For example, you're fighting an enemy character, you're swinging your sword. How much does it hurt your opponent? Well, there will be some kind of random or pseudo-random. Random for all practical purposes for us people, we could call them random numbers. So, all right, actually pseudo-random numbers as a probabilistic mechanism. And this applies within a video game. So in a video game, the way the world calculates stuff is actually relying on an assumption of randomness. So, like, in person, I'll admit this, right? Me being kind of a nerd and then talking with other nerds, they're like, well, I don't know what the outcome will be, and then kind of jokingly, will the random number gods be favorable to me? Now, this is all kind of funny because if you actually go in and look at like old what pagans and different religions and people have said, then it won't be expressed in the same language, but it's kind of, I'll just call it like a neo-paganism reboot, kind of, in that you're looking at randomness, chaotic forces at work. So the idea is actually quite similar. Oops. Okay, let's just get this out of the way. I'll save this, because we're saying big brain things that might want to remember later. Let's call this stochastic language.odt. Maybe I'll write an essay or something. Okay, Reaper's got some notes about the RNG, the random number gods. Let's see what Reaper has to say. Okay, so first, one more note related to stochastic terrorism. Reaper says, stochastic terrorism is when one crazy across the world says bad stuff, then they know someone will act, but they have no idea who that is. Okay. Reaper, one topic we're going to get more into in this stream probably is this idea of anonymity and technique. So this might come up again, where it's like you could have a lot of games. I guess I could put this in notes. And lots of games often have a mechanism of hidden anonymous plays, right? So you won't be able to see some aspect, or you won't know who does some action, but somebody does something. Like, with playing cards, a clear example is you have playing cards, and then people will play cards face down. So all the data is going in, like the game has rules that works in a particular way, but everybody's actions are all hidden until at a certain point they get revealed, and then things are shuffled. So everybody's acting in a very private way in these games. That's maybe we'll talk more about these games with this stochastic terrorism topic. That's interesting. All right, Reaper says RNG originally stands for random number generator. Oh, okay. So let's add that. Originally stands for random number generator. So a more direct technical implementation of stuff. But RNG has become kind of a noun. Oh, there was too much RNG. Okay, Reaper says, you're talking about RNG and paganism from one angle, but almost all MMOs are directly based on D&D, which was directly based on Lord of the Rings, which was directly based, synthesized by Tolkien from Norse Celtic pagan mythology. So you're kind of having a head eats tail moment there. I think that's another pagan symbol, right? Yes, Reaper, astute observation. What you're referring to is the Ouroboros, the snake eats snake. We could take a look at the Ouroboros. A serpent or a dragon eating its own tail. So cool. Oh, and then we have some naughty symbols here. But yes, funny that you bring this up, Reaper, because this is yet another connection of how a lot of the stuff that we're talking about here, it might say, oh yeah, we're just talking about random numbers, probabilities. Like there's a science behind it, and that there's like theories, and you could have people do problems in a predictable way. That's what students in the statistics class will have to do. Work out the problems. Everyone should be expected to get the same answers, and so on and so forth. So nothing too surprising there. So there is like an engineering and a science aspect to all this, but it is also a particular model of how the world works. And I think, yes, Ripper's making this connection to Dungeons and Dragons, which I think is appropriate too, because if we're talking about the cultural stuff, about different games, how different role-playing games and stuff have come up with systems like having different classes, stats, calculating damage, all this sort of stuff, then we see these same ideas, these same patterns passed down on all of these new forms. And then, what will be the modern manifestation of how this stuff connects in real life? It'll be you building your neo LinkedIn profile with your stats, and then they'll roll a dice and calculate what role that you will fulfill within Microsoft Corporation or whatever. Cool. All right, I'll continue. Hopefully we get some other friends to join us, like our friend Hello, who seems to know a lot about different games and stuff. It would be cool to hear from him. All right, so stochastic language, numbers. Okay, useful topics. Okay, so let's start to talk about Jacques Ellul chapter 2. So, this chapter, let me hop over to it, is titled the categories of technique, something like that. Yeah, Characterology of Technique. So it seems like in this chapter what Jacques Ellul is doing is he's enumerating lots of different properties of technique. So if we thought chapter 1 was just him talking about what is technique, well, he's talking about what is technique more in this chapter. But maybe more specifically, he's offering some criteria by which we could look at and compare different techniques. So how is the modern age, so he's writing from 1954, somewhere mid-20th century. How is this time period? And by this time, they already had washing machines and all of these different things. How is this period different from, like, medieval craftsmen? Because medieval craftsmen, like, I'm sure they had some machines. Like, maybe you have some barrel thing and you have some wood thing for churning butter or something. I don't know enough about what sort of technology, what sort of techniques they had in that period, but certainly there were always people using tools. So why do we have to have a whole book to explore techniques? What new things does Jacques Ellul have to say? So in this chapter, he brings up a number of points or questions that he's going to answer. So I'll just start. I copied down some of them here. So one question he asks is, has technique of today somehow fundamentally changed? For example, is a nuclear bomb really different in character than a Bronze Age sword moving out of the Stone Age? So, right, we could see how we could improve technology in kind, like, or within like the same species of a thing. So, for example, let's suppose you have a pencil, and then the lead in the pencil always breaks, and then you develop a new pencil where the lead does not break as much, but still fundamentally you're using a pencil and you're writing with the pencil and doing all the pencil things in the same way. Well, I mean, really, you made a better pencil, or like a ballpoint pen. It will write in the same manner as like a fountain pen, but you're not going to refill it as much. You could write a long time. You could write upside down. You're less likely to splatter ink. You could argue from an aesthetics perspective, maybe it doesn't look as nice, but obviously a ballpoint pen is a very convenient tool in a lot of ways. So those would be examples of things that I think we could all agree they didn't like fundamentally change. Whereas on the other hand, if I'm talking about writing with a pen and a paper versus a digital tablet or writing on a computer or even writing on a typewriter, then when we get to these levels, people might begin to say, okay, well, I think It's not just you upgraded your writing, like buying a new pen or a pencil. There's something that's more fundamental about the technology that's changed. So, in classifying techniques, looking at the characterology of different techniques, we could look at how some development, does it fundamentally change stuff, or is it just like a little upgrade or an improvement? Because those are different. Okay, the next point Ellul went over is this, which comes from Mark and Engels, so our dear comrades. Let's see, discussing, quote, beyond a certain quantity, the phenomenon, even though in a sense it remains the same, does not have the same quality. It is not of the same character. Okay. And then I made a note here about what we could call scaling effects. So when we look at different techniques or different technologies, I think one big question to ask is, at what scale is the technology used? Because sometimes you don't get these big effects until it's everywhere. So let's look at Biden's Build Back Better framework. Very relevant. First off, interesting, using the word framework here. Sounds very technical, just like web development frameworks. Okay, so one of the big deals nowadays that a lot of people are talking about are electric cars, clean energy, all sorts of stuff like this. So we could say like on a personal level, for somebody's house, let's pretend you cut your own power costs down a lot by putting up an initial investment, getting some solar power panels, setting them up carefully, and then you have some battery powered things you charge and all of that. Then that's cool and fine. You've made a local improvement, and through what you're doing, adapting all this green energy, it doesn't have to transform the whole rest of society. In fact, you could probably just keep on doing what you're doing, and a lot of the stuff you do, people probably wouldn't even know unless they asked or you told them, right? It's just like if you had a backyard and people aren't peeking in your backyard, and you just collected, saved, and filtered some rainwater, like, just quantity-wise, that's not very much rainwater. What's that going to do? Though I hear that's illegal. Somebody could give me a fact check on whether or not it's illegal to just collect and do stuff with rainwater. Maybe it's out of suspicion that people might investigate what's in the rainwater and think about trails in the sky. But that's a different topic. Let's return and talk more about green energy. So looking at like green energy stuff, if we talk about bringing out green energy at scale, so we have a technique, we have the technologies to do stuff already, but in order to bring it to something like public transit, for example, or to make it more widespread, you're going to have to bring in a lot of bigger and bigger and bigger structures, right? So like if you're in a little town and you have an electric car and you charge a car at your house, well, it's very limited what you could do if there's not a charging thing for a long way off. Now, on the other hand, if we get charging ports like all over, then this solution, it could scale. So looking at techniques in general, I think too we could look at the ability for different things to scale and the requirements for that to happen. And that'll often take a societal thing. So that was all kind of fuzzy. I'll keep on going. I think this topic will come back up. But this word scaling, you'll see it a lot of the time with like the startup bros. Like I'm just going to let's search for like scaling a startup or something. Another word might be like going viral. How do you make your idea blow up? So yeah, you might have a cool idea, You're doing your coding, but your idea is going to need to catch on, and you're going to need to have enough resources if you have to put up an additional cost at the beginning. How do we scale? Automate, streamline, and outsource. All right. This is sounding right out of the Jacques Ellul guide to how to techniqueify a society. Okay, customer retention. Right, if the law helps with customer retention, captive audience, it's gonna enjoy your product. Raise capital. Right, also cut costs with taxes and all that. Hire and fire judiciously, so get the sort of people you want. Okay, well, we have some expertise of some people that check into this show on startup and that sort of stuff, so we'll try to go for more informed discussion of that later. But this is to say, look at stuff like the startup pattern, like things Silicon Valley does. Don't just look at the technology of Silicon Valley. If we're reading Jacques Ellul to try to understand what's going on, right? We can't just look at, oh yeah, computers got better in this way. Look at the business systems, the finance systems, all the ways in which things have been systematized around us, the different techniques that are employed, and then we could better understand how stuff works. So ultimately, that is one of our goals here. We want to work together to research and learn how stuff works. So we're reading Jacques Ellul, but I think, yes, this approach of just talking about how it's related to current stuff, hopefully other people find it helpful and interesting. That's probably the main reason I find this interesting, is it's not just some dude's fantasy novel. It's telling us about how stuff works, and there's a lot of good observations. All right, let's continue. Okay, so another point. So chapter 2, this will be page 63 in the PDF. We are going to see, so I'll skip to that page right here. Okay, so Jacques Ellul writes, in fact, technique has taken substance, has become a reality in itself. It is no longer merely a means and an intermediary. It is an object in itself, an independent reality with which we must reckon. Okay, let's give some Alan story time. So you have probably heard the phrase like learn to code. Learn to code. If I search it, let's see how many results do I get. We need Google, because Google wants us to learn to code. They will be delighted that we search learn to code. All right, so that's 4,190,000,000 results. So a huge number of things. And then we have all these different websites of various sorts relating to learn to code. Code.org, freecodecamp.org, TechCrunch. Oh, but theirs is called Please Don't Learn to Code. It's probably going to say please don't learn to code, learn to think critically and solve problems. Let's see if it says that. There's an idea that's been gaining around in the tech community lately. Everyone should learn to code. But here's the problem with that idea. Coding is not the new literacy. If you regularly pay attention to the cultural shenanigans of Silicon Valley, you've no doubt heard of the Learn to Code movement. Politicians, nonprofit organizations like Code.org, and even former Mayor Michael Bloomberg of New York City have evangelized what they view as a necessary skill for tomorrow's workforce. All right. Okay, so this person is just giving some skepticism. Okay, so this seems, yeah, this article, I would say I misjudged. I was wrong in my prediction. I thought it would be a bit more clickbaity, but it actually is a little bit more informative than I guessed. Here, software engineering is a lucrative field, but the transformation from, quote, coder to engineer is challenging. If you stick to it, you could not only change your life, but change your entire way of thinking. So it's trying to be a little bit discouraging to people that are thinking that just learn to code is a get rich fast sort of scheme. But it's a disciplined thing that takes a long time. You can't just take one course and be a master at it. You got to really discipline yourself, put yourself through it. Okay, so why was I bringing up all this learn to code stuff? This is in response to this line here. Technique has taken substance and become a reality in of itself. So rather than saying something like, let's contrast learn to code with what if I said to you instead, we need more web programmers. Or I said to you, like, we need more people to make games with the Unity engine or something. Here, there's an emphasis on the specific end product. So you need people to fulfill a role for a particular end product. Even if I said something like, we need more delivery drivers, something like that. Well, it's obvious kind of what you're going to be doing. You're going to be driving to deliver stuff if someone's going to be a delivery driver. But the learn to code thing is interesting here because coding is this very abstract activity. Like my own definition I gave for like programming or coding, I kind of will group them all together. Of course, you could talk about higher level, so more abstract, and then lower level, more directly on the machine. You could talk about all these things, but basically it's humans telling computers to do stuff as opposed to telling like humans to do stuff. But we see like coding in of itself is this huge domain where like clearly all these are targeted at pretty young audiences, at kids, and they're telling them to code. Oh, George says hello to George. But what is the coding that you're doing? It's like you solving little puzzles within made-up worlds, basically. I'll even say the same thing, like before the whole learn to code thing became very popular, and of course, just if anybody is listening and has I begin to offend them, I'm not saying like coding is stupid or anything like that. I'm just saying that it's a very particular sort of thing, and there's a huge emphasis placed on it. But like the end product, what you're actually doing, what you're actually practicing is learning about like a fake world, basically, and then how to make stuff efficient within a fake world. Like that's often what you're doing when you're coding. So the example I was going to bring up was, think too about just telling somebody to study mathematics. So what is studying mathematics? What does it involve? I think that anybody who feels comfortable doing a lot of mathematics, like the way that I think any math teacher would suggest to get proficient at doing mathematics stuff would be to do a bunch of math problems. You sit down, you have a book, there's some exercises, you do a bunch of math problems, and then over time you'll get more comfortable with funny Greek letters and squiggles and all the things that were initially difficult for you when you're studying math. They'll become easier to you over time as you become familiar working with these very, we could call them alien symbols. They're not natural to us in the same way that we use language every day. So if you learn how to use some basic writing or even some basic arithmetic to do some basic like adding, I say, oh, give me this quantity of that. Something like that is quite normal. Whereas it took a long time for people to discover stuff like, how do I solve a quadratic or whatever. All these things, it's actually quite specialized technical knowledge. So this coding stuff, me personally, I view it as a kind of extension of the same idea, like with all the math stuff, where you're training a lot of people to be very good at operating in and optimizing in basically arbitrary systems. It doesn't matter how much it links or reflects reality. It's like we give you all these components, tell you the rules about how they fit together, what does and doesn't work together, and then somebody who's a proficient coder is somebody who's very skilled at being able to get the results they want within a little sandbox with a fixed set of tools. So learn to code, right, it's a focus on the technique itself, so the coding aspect, namely using computers to solve a particular sort of problem. And the hope for, like, if you're a tech futurist, utopian type, is that computers, really, they're the general machine. So, we've talked on this stream about stuff like the Internet of Things. So this hasn't like totally mainstreamed yet. But yes, I searched this up. You could find your standard promotional type imagery. Anyways, so one thing though, looking at technology efforts and stuff that a lot of governments and people in power are putting forth, a lot of it is very, very technology focused. Technology technique, if we're going to use Jacques Ellul language. Like, it's about getting everybody more and more closely integrated into systems. It's about the expansion, the growth of systems, everything becoming system. And like, let me just give you an example here. So a big issue for a lot of people is like a healthcare stuff, because people get sick, they need healthcare. Now, historically, we could look at how there's all sorts of ways in which people might heal themselves, right? Like somebody might just be like, drink a glass of wine, get enough sleep, and make sure you get some sunlight, right? Like that could be a cure that somebody offers, but it will take a lot of patience and pain, and you got to do that for quite a lot of time. Like one of the super challenging things about our modern world is it's very costly for people to do stuff like take time off sick. Of course, hospital bills and this stuff, that it could be really high. So a lot of the times you'll have a lot of people that are quite sick, and then they're just like, I want like a quick patch up, and then I have to do my work, and it's on this kind of treadmill, a kind of hamster wheel, where there's it's a system that could bring someone further and further in, especially like I myself, I think I'm in pretty good health, so I'm fortunate enough that I'm not very familiar with the system. But if you're a person that's like chronically sick, always in and out of the hospital, then it's almost like this thing is the all-consuming part of your life. Anyways, I bring that up to just say, so we have all these fields, for example, healthcare, in which the robots and the programming and the technique, all this is like top priority. So I'm just going to search. I haven't searched this before. I'm going to search like surgery robot, right? And I'll probably get tons of hits. I look at images, right? So where you have like healthcare workers, they're not a doctor, like a person with the scalpel doing surgery by hand, but rather you have a lot of people that are operators of high-tech, expensive equipment that run software. And then you have a lot of data, the machine learning, so like different scans, automatic diagnoses via computer stuff. I'm going to search one creepy phrase. I'm going to search humans as platform. What will come up if I search that? Oh, TechCrunch. humans the next platform? The human body as a development platform. What is the human cloud? The human cloud is a technology industry term that has started to take over when describing online or digital labor and staffing platforms. These platforms not only help workers find jobs, but they also specialize in the management and optimization of your workflow. Workers of the human cloud are usually made up of contractors, freelancers, consultants, and other categories of the flexible and contingent workforce. These workers value flexibility and need a quick and efficient way to connect to job opportunities, so on and so forth. So this is talking about like labor as a thing that you could program. Because if we're talking about platforms where people are like getting connected, finding jobs, freelancers like Uber or whatever, all these things, these platforms, it's taking a job such as driving, and then it's turning it into a kind of tech job in a way, or at least putting a tech framework over it. With the surgery robots, that was an example with healthcare. And then I think that one of the ultimate endgame things is to get literally under people's skin. And you could see articles like here. This is from TechCrunch, so they're a pretty big site. Let's see what Jeffrey Wu has to say. This is 2015, so a while ago. He says, biohacking and transhumanist advances, including nootropics, or so-called smart drugs, extended longevity, cybernetic implants, better behavioral and genetics self-understanding, will materially advance our quality of life and productivity in the coming decade. But we need to be thoughtful about the potential social and ethical pitfalls as we transform. Google Trend shows a marked uptick in searches for nootropics, the smart drugs, and related biohacking fields. So now is the time to have the conversation about the direction we're headed. Alright, continuing, digital products companies are not only changing the way we live our lives, but also playing larger, more influential roles in public policy and governance. The trend of technology industry driving broader social policy will perhaps be even greater with biohacking companies as their product innovators begin to alter and transform what it means to be human. Oof. Okay, so let us back up for a second. Right, so you spend some time, you read these articles, you look at these things a little bit, whether it's referring to peoples as the human clouds, humans as operators of surgery machines, talking about learning to code machine robots, and at a certain point, it's quite, to me at least, it's disconcerting. It's like, is this even about humans anymore? Like, where did the humans fit into this? It's almost like the technology is first, and then the humans are a secondary thing to be managed. So yes, this another goal here, linking in with the transhumanism stuff, the human body as a development platform. So it's just like now we have code that could do all sorts of stuff with computers. Eventually, what will happen if we're able to program people? So you no longer have to, let's say, remember to take some medication. Instead, there's a program, and it's like, oh yeah, you signed this contract, you enroll with the system, whatever. Then we're going to administer, this treatment 3 times a week. Just make sure you go near this machine, or it might be like a wearable, something like that. Maybe we don't even need chemicals. Like, let's suppose that there's some treatment that involves some electric stimulation. So you just have to wear, like, let's say it's like a face mask, and it has some electrode node thingies in some particular places, and then at a set interval it will administer a treatment. Now all of these things they could all be automated, and they could all be coded. But we don't have these things yet. So I'll bring this full circle and look at this quote again. So Jacques Ellul was saying, technique has taken substance, has become reality in itself. So you could look and ask, why would you want people to just learn to code generically? Why would you train people to be very happy with just abstractions and applying them to any sorts of problems? And like the answer I'm suggesting here is, you might have all these technologies for all these diverse fields, and you're not training up that many like expert brain surgeons or whatever. So instead, if you have a bunch of people that are just skilled technical operators able to locally solve a problem, provided they have the data and some specialist or somebody could tell them what to optimize for, what to do. If they have the understanding of the mathematics, the coding knowledge, this abstract knowledge, then you could extend this technical thing, the technological society. You could become a part of building the technological society through learning to code, basically. So further integrating machines and things into our workflow. All right, looks like we do not have any further comments yet, so I'll just continue. I think we're not absent of content, so it is fitting to continue. But if there is something specific you would like brought up or discussed, please do let me know. All right, so continuing on Jacques Ellul. So the next section he has, Technique and Civilization. Let me pull that up. He looks at these questions. So what was the position of technique in the different societies that preceded ours? So if we're going to call our current society a technological society, a question to ask is, so what distinguishes our society from past societies? Because everyone used technology. Why is our society different? So Jacques Ellul starts by enumerating some features that are common for techniques in any civilization. But we could see that, like in our society, and I'm saying ours, I'll include him, he's 1950s, 20th century. I would say all those features from his time, we still see them today, though in different, one might say, evolved forms. So let's continue. His first thing here I have written down is, he writes, first, technique was applied only in certain narrow, limited areas. And there were some interesting notes that he had in this section that I think they were descriptions of why the technique was narrowed. So recalling from the previous stream, Jacques Ellul was talking about this sort of spiritual underpinnings, the motivations, why Western man brought techniques to its current heights. So one of the things that Jacques Ellul articulated was, using technique, we could maximize our material output. So you might ask and say, what sort of problems might a person ask for technology to help? And we could look at the different products that are very common to understand why. So, for example, to have nice couches and sofas and washing machines. So why would you want a nice sofa and a washing machine? Well, you would want a sofa because it would be a comfortable place to sit down and relax. And then you would want to have a washing machine because to do the work of washing your clothes by hand and stuff, it could be a lot of work. So if you could reduce the work you could do, thereby being able to enjoy more time with leisure, like enjoying a nice couch that you had, then we could give this to more people. The idea is, with technology, you could raise everyone's standard of living. So this would be one of the ways why people would readily want technology, because they would like for things like ease of life, comfort, leisure, and so on and so forth. So the technologies, they sell themselves in these ways. Likewise, we could look in our current era, like Alexa devices, voice control stuff. So why would people want that? Well, instead of having to go over, flip open a laptop, log into somewhere and do something, if you could just voice command, you don't even have to change locations, then maybe for a lot of people this is appealing because they could do more with moving less. So Jacques Ellul makes an interesting point. He highlights that primitive man and historical man did not seek to maximize consumption. They would rather work less and eat less. So I thought this was a astute comment here, because once again explaining why. I think so. I grew up in the West. I was born and raised in the United States, and I would say that there often is a sense with Westerners and Americans about how we're the best at a lot of stuff, because by certain measures we are, right? Like in the United States, we could say we have the biggest companies or whatever. Maybe not by the dollar values, but by other metrics. Like everybody in the Western world will use like Google or Facebook, stuff like that. A lot of these inventions, they came from the United States. So certainly, in terms of developing techniques and stuff, the United States has a ton going for it. But another question to ask, and Jacques Ellul had brought this up earlier in his book too, is, well, okay, do you think that everybody else is just dumb, or are they doing other stuff? And I think that here Jacques Ellul fairly says that, right, his primitive man, historical man, did not seek to maximize consumption and would rather work less and eat less. So if your goal of life isn't to just increase production, to consume, let's put up the consume meme, because we could have a more exciting image than just the text. Let's get consumer. All right, let's bring up consumer. It's gonna load. All right, we'll bring up one consumer. Okay, so the historic man, the primitive man, did not seek to maximize consumption. They would rather work less and eat less. So interestingly, like this idea, you could see it with the Christian calendar. So there's a lot more like holidays, days where there's like special services. So people might be asked to take extra time off work to do a lot of these things. And if a society, they all agree upon this religion as normative, then you would expect that society in general, they would have less economic output, and that there would be less like work days. So a business that's open 24/7, maybe they're being able to churn more and more customers than a business that's only open 5 or 6 days a week. By the numbers, that would make sense. But could look at, right, some people, historical man, primitive man, would rather work less and eat less. So if you don't need to eat as much, you don't need as many luxuries, then it's not as important to work as much. Work in the sense of working to make money, or to work to produce things to sell to make money, whatever we're talking about. Because if you could do other things that are free to do, like fast and pray, then, well, you have those concerns, and those are very difficult things to do, so you're plenty occupied. Whereas, in the West, I think that long work weeks, Americans are infamous for having not very many holidays, all this stuff. And yes, so is the historic man, the primitive man, are they wiser than the modern man by working less and eating less? I leave that to you, the viewer, to decide. Oh, we're joined by another guest. What's up, K-Talent Kekma? continuing. So now Jacques Ellul citing a different author. He says, according to Gideon, the men of the Middle Ages were also concerned with comfort, but for them comfort had an entirely different form and content. It represented a feeling of moral and aesthetic order. Space was the primary element in comfort. Men sought open spaces, large rooms, and the possibility of moving about. So I found this really interesting too. Let's actually look up the etymology of the word comfort. I am curious about if that older sense that is used here is accounted for in the etymology or the definition for comfort. So let us look. Comfort. The verb is from Middle English comforten, from Old French conforter, late Latin conforto, to strengthen greatly, itself from Latin con, together, and fortis, strong. That's interesting. Okay, so for people in the Middle Ages, being together, strong, to strengthen themselves. So nowadays, when we talk about comforts of modern life, it's like, oh yeah, I'm lounging, I'm just chilling, I'm enjoying the comforts. I got a pet cat. Not that there's anything wrong with pet cats per se. But the etymology of this term is like, in meme slang, we could say it's increasing your power level. What does increasing your power level mean? Oh, that has more video game connotations too. Maybe we'll look at that at a different time. Right. So people, though, in the Middle Ages, rather than just trying to find rest or pleasure, here it says comfort was representation of moral and aesthetic order, and that space was valuable. So instead of getting like more donuts and like a nice couch, playing some Vigi games, what would people do? Go to an open space. So large room. So this sounds like maybe go out into the nature, walk in some fields, climb a mountain. Large room, to me that sounds like a nice place to pace back and forth. I think any of you here, so like we have K-Talent Kekma here saying he's on his grind set now, studying for biology. If I was studying for biology, how would I do that? I'd probably like have a book. I might draw some pictures. I'd like read the book. I'd walk back and forth. I might bring the book somewhere. I might study outside. This is saying, yes, space is primary element in comfort. If we use space, open spaces, large rooms, things like that, then I think they could aid us in stuff like learning, intellectual labor, whatever you want to call it. Okay, more interesting points. So Ellul says here, the deficiency of the tool, so the like primitiveness of the technology, was compensated for by the skill of the worker. So let's just say that you don't have a super fancy good washing machine. Well, that it doesn't matter if you don't have a washing machine if you have somebody who's very skilled and efficient at washing clothes. I think a lot of the people that check out this stream, they're interested in topics like retro computing. So like we've talked about the Emacs text editor, for instance. So why would somebody become interested? Well, actually Vim text editor is a better example to illustrate what I'm saying. Sorry, Emacs friends. Okay, so on the one hand, you might look at a tool. So this program I'm using here with these notes, this program is called NeoVim or Vim. So as you can see, it's not, it looks like primitive compared to, I don't know, some fancy app or something. But if you know how to use this tool, it's really cool. Like I'm going to split the window. I could jump to the top, jump to the bottom, right? Um, you could do like a vertical selection. Like see how I'm doing a box. I'm selecting multiple lines simultaneously. Pretty cool. So a lot of people become interested in tools like this because on the one hand it looks simple and like less featured than like some big full screen a fancy app like a lot of the video editing software or like the 3D programs. So the tool, it might look simpler, but then if you know a lot of techniques and stuff how to use it, then as Jacques Ellul was saying, the deficiency of the tool is compensated by your skill as a worker. So you just start to use the tool, you won't be able to do very much at all. But you spend a lot of the time using a tool, even if the tool is quite simple, then you could do all sorts of stuff with it. And another like perfect example is like a pen or a pencil. Like if you're good at writing, you're good at drawing, you're good at that sort of stuff, then you don't actually need to be a computer wizard. Like you could make a really good drawing. You could scan it and then like click 2 buttons and upload it on Instagram and become famous. Now, of course, it's not that easy, but the idea, I think, is here, which is saying that it's not big tools that sell stuff. It is the, what do you call it? The skill of the worker, as being said here. All right. Kekma says, you sound nasal. Are you sick? No, I don't feel sick. Maybe like very slightly congested, but I don't think I'm sick. I might just sound nasal. Pardon my French. Oui, oui. All right. Continuing more on the notes for this section. So another quote, until the 18th century, all societies were primarily oriented toward improvement in the use of tools and were little concerned with the tools themselves. So this is an interesting point as well, and I will bring up programmers as a group of people that I've worked with that I say I'm kind of familiar with related to that. I would say that a lot of people who are professional programmers, they have more or less given up on trying to insist or have opinions about a lot of technology. Like, oh, what's the best programming language? Like, people don't really care. Like, they have their preferences. But if you're being paid to work on a project in a particular language, you got to use what you got, and you could try to make the best use of it. Use it to the best of your ability, and you could try to choose projects that use tools that you like. I wouldn't say that's even unique to programming, right? You do any sort of job, given the choice, you might choose to do certain work over other work. But yeah, ultimately, you're just going to use what works to get the job done, and you have little concern with the tools themselves. So until the 18th century, so this is saying this is more medieval man, kind of older style thinking. And I think a lot of programmers who we would consider to be experts in their field, very skilled, good people, they kind of operate in this way. Now, a more modern approach is to be a bugman nerd about programming. And I will admit myself that I have actually myself fallen into this trap. So that's why I'm talking about it. Let me just run and grab a book to prove my credentials that I have been a bugman before. Okay, so I'm going to show just a couple programming books to contrast two approaches. So the first book would be like the sort of medieval approach that I'm talking about. So I have this book. It's called The Pragmatic Programmer. So you can see like right on the cover of this book, there's like some carpentry tools, and it says of the author on the back, he's a woodworker and a musician, and he worked in finance and lot of other fields. And the other author, He likes to fly airplanes. So these are people that like do a bunch of stuff. Anyway, so this book, it has like just various practical tips by working professionals, people who have programmed themselves and worked with a bunch of programmers. So if I'm like stuck and I don't know how to make progress or get better at programming, if I flip open that book, then it could be a useful way to get to understand some other stuff. Okay, so that would be, looking at this quote again, the tools primarily oriented improvement in the use of the tools and were little concerned with the tools themselves. So the pragmatic, the practical programmer, they're kind of like that. You know, you use what language is available for the hardware, whatever task you're given. Now, on the other hand, the nerd approach, like here I had this book on Haskell. Interesting book, kind of pretty hard to understand book. I didn't go through this whole book. I went through a lot of this book. And it's written by an academic. So a person's job is to do programming language research type stuff. So the person that's doing like research on programming languages, what is their role? Well, their very role is to be primarily oriented towards the tool themselves. If you're a person that studies programming languages, writes papers and books and all this stuff about programming languages themselves, your main job isn't solving like problems with computers in the real world. Rather, your job is to focus on the tools and the technique itself. So these two books, I think they show a different approach. Another book I have here, it's about an old programming language called Prolog. So I got this because I was in a class and they used some Prolog. So I went ahead and I did a bunch of the exercises and stuff in here. And I learned about Prolog. But these things are all like, you're looking at the tool itself. Prolog is interesting because it models a particular way of thinking and approaching stuff. But if you go and you look like, where's Prolog actually used in the world? What are you going to find? You're not going to find very much at all. So how was I drawn into that sort of stuff, like the academic stuff? I think this has to do with, it's like a modern kind of bogeyman approach to stuff, which is to say, I want to have like the coolest tools. I want to use the best techniques. So rather than just focusing purely on like, I just have to do work. Work is work, and I don't want to work too much, and I don't want to eat too much because I have other stuff to do. If you're trying to build and cultivate like a lot of your life around your work and finding your work meaningful, then not work as a means to an end towards other things, then I think it's very common for people to spend a lot of time on their tooling. So that's that. Let's look forward. There were some more interesting quotes here. So we have one here from page 74. It says, on the contrary, progress is made only after innumerable individual experiments, but the individual participates only to the degree that he is subordinate to the search for efficiency, to the degree that he resists all currents today considered secondary. Sorry, I was distracted. I had a typo I made. All currents today considered secondary, such as aesthetics, ethics, fantasy, and so on. Okay, so a couple important words here. Progress is made only after innumerable individual experiments. So I know a lot of people who admit that like oftentimes doing science is really boring. Like actual going into labs, like doing institutional science. Of course, you could find countless videos and stuff of people being like, oh yeah, I like to know that I'm, part of a project and so on and so forth. But like the ins and outs of it, like suppose you're a biology student, like your job might be chopping the heads off rats. Like I met a girl. It's like, oh, what do you do at your internship, your job? It's like, oh well, I have to, and then she said some technical words, and then I was like, wait, so does that mean like you kill the rats basically? It's like, yeah, pretty much. I like chop off their heads with a little razor blade. It's like, oh wow, that's that's the price of science. So innumerable individual experience is often how progress is made, in the sense that this is how you get more data so you could inform and train the models, and refine the techniques. And right, this thing. Okay, so your other stuff, technique is put first, and it's subservient, or aesthetics, ethics, and fantasy are subservient. So it's like, I don't feel right killing mice. All right, put second. I didn't imagine my job being like this. All right, fantasy. It's like, oh, this doesn't have a good vibe. It doesn't fit me. Aesthetics, put to the side, because you must submit to the progress of science. So related to this point, because in many ways this is basically saying that optimizing for technique and stuff, it's a real slog, it's a real drag. It's like, it's no wonder more people aren't interested in majoring in STEM or something, because a lot of it just sucks. So what comes by sucks, I mean like it sucks to do. Like the process of doing it is super miserable. So what is the response that a lot of people have to that? So let's look at these three things that we said are put secondary: aesthetics, ethics, and fantasy. So like for the aesthetic stuff, one of the things that we've been talking about in this stream is the cyberpunk aesthetic or genre. So maybe staying up late debugging programs and stuff, that's no fun. But if you could like rice out your computer, you get like a cyberpunk wallpaper going. Like, how cool is that? I have to stay up till 2 a.m. writing computer code. But, I can imagine that, I'm in this cool aesthetic place. I could listen to J-pop. Could play some electronic music in the background. So people might have to, in their jobs and stuff, put all aesthetic concerns aside. But then you see, like, even working tech stuff, given the choice, then people will try to fill in that void. I think with the cyberpunk too, of course, there's the whole fantasy element to it all. Imagining things that do not yet exist, that are not here, and using that as a kind of motivation. So it's like, why do you want to code computers? It's like, well, I want to be part of building the future. And what is the future supposed to look like? It's going to be cool, like cyberpunk. That's why I'm studying Asian languages too. And the ethics, putting the ethical questions aside, that one's a bit more difficult to answer. So I won't treat that, except to say that by focusing not so much on saying like I'm not even going to try to answer ethic questions at all. Instead, I'm going to focus on getting better at C++ or something, right? Then that's a place that I have been in myself, which is to say, what should I do? I don't know. I'll get better at coding. Like, that's something I could do. And I've chosen to do that over maybe answering questions like, what is even the point of this? Why am I doing what I'm doing? It's very easy to just say, okay, actually, I'm going to disregard that and just focus on technique, productivity, workflow. And if you search, I'll just go on YouTube and I search like, I don't know, productivity tips. Let's see what comes up. Productivity tips. then all sorts of stuff will come up. So we see how I stay productive when feeling unmotivated by Study to Success channel. 10 top tips for healthy productivity. How to stop procrastinating and get work done. How I manage my time. 25 productivity tips and hacks, and so on and so forth. So a lot of parts of the modern world, it's not obvious why you're doing what you're doing. As I was saying, in a lot of ways, stuff sucks, you know? And so in order to cope, right, then people come up with all sorts of ways to try to keep themselves motivated to do things, because you have to, in a way, well, you have to have enough motivation to continue doing what you're doing. Otherwise, somebody will, you'll just stop. You'll do something else. Okay. And then one final quote from this section. The more an instrument is designed to execute a single operation efficiently and with utmost precision, the less it can be multi-purpose. So this goes into this idea of specialization. So if we look at the modern world versus, say, like the Middle Ages, we could see how the roles that people occupy, in many cases, they've gotten much, much, much more narrow. So, for example, like I'm not a doctor, but I've met, doctors and stuff. Oftentimes doctors, you could choose to be more general, or you could choose to be like a narrow specialty. But a lot of the trend now is to see a lot of specialists that are working in hospitals. So you go to like a big hospital, and then you'll see a specialist for whatever you're doing, as opposed to, say, like a little town with a country doctor. So this would be an interesting topic to look at the history of a lot more, but you could look at any given field and you could see how through the evolution of technique, the roles that individual people are playing have become much, much more narrow. I'll say from like computer science programming stuff that I know, like there's this term, full stack developer. So these are the people, oftentimes contractors are working for a company that basically do anything that has to do with building a website. So this is your sort of generalist. So if you're like, I'm going to make you an online store, then you might actually do a little bit of design work to do the front. You might work with some databases to deal with how the data gets stored in a database. You'll do all sorts of stuff. So if a person says they're a full stack developer, then that means they kind of know enough about all the little parts of the technology such that if you inserted them to any part of the process, they would, they might have to study up and become familiar with particular technologies, but they would understand the whole thing. Now, I know that there's a lot of people that aren't like this, that might actually be getting paid like quite well for doing something. Like you might be a front end only specialist. Like all you do all day is make fancy CSS. So let's just look at some examples of the level of details people put into some stuff. So rather than drawing this, you just like write all this code in order to make a picture. So this stuff is really intense. Like I'm sure some people do it without being on drugs. It's like, do you really want to spend like 40 hours making a little cactus? I don't know. Personally, I don't want to do this. It doesn't seem to me like a particularly good use of time and energy. But it takes a lot of skill. It takes being very careful, and it takes a lot to make these images. Not my favorite style of images, but tip my fedora, because it does take a lot of talent and stuff to make these things. but like stuff like that, if it takes that much time to make, and it's such a specialized skill, how does that work? How does someone even come to be able to do that? And yeah, I think that goes along with what this quote is saying. The more an instrument is designed to execute a single operation efficiently and with utmost precision, the less it can become. It could be multi-purpose. So we have stuff like CSS art or whatever, where truly you could get really, really good at something like that. But every time that you're choosing to get better at one thing, there's always trade-offs with respect to the other things, the other areas you don't develop. And I think just not everyone's cut out. Like to me, it's distasteful to be like too much of a specialist, like making CSS art or something. But that's why I'm not doing it, right? Apparently, a lot of people enjoy it or are able to do it enough, and they become the master of their craft. Okay, so now we're looking at more Jacques Ellul. He's talking about characterology of technique. So we're still on listing aspects of technology that past societies as well as current societies have with technique. So we just looked at a bunch of examples of, what word did he use? Oh, okay. That the nature of technique is that it's applied within a narrow domain. The second one here I thought was quite interesting. He calls it artificiality. So I got two spicy quotes here. Let me read the first one. Okay. The second obvious characteristic of the technical phenomenon is artificiality. Technique is opposed to nature. Art, artifice, artificial. Technique as art is the creation of a artificial system. This is not a matter of opinion. So he says this is not a matter of opinion. So this goes along with what I was saying about all this learn to code stuff. I was basically saying learn to code means learning how to be a good administrator in a fake world or something like that. Right, so all these things, they're artificial worlds, and then you learn how to write instructions in them. So like save the forest. Let's look at save the forest. I don't have to register or something, do I? I have to sign in and save. Yeah. Okay, I'm not going to do all this now. Anyways, the point though is that all these are artificial worlds. Like they're fake trees on the screen, and then you'll learn to code, which will mean you'll be able to learn rules and win at puzzle games, basically. Okay, the second quote here that I liked, that was fitting, was the two worlds, so that's the natural and the artificial, obey different imperatives, different objectives, and different laws which have nothing in common. Whoa, that is pretty strong rhetoric. So I was actually bringing this up right at the beginning of the stream when I was talking about stuff like the RNG, the random number generator, which later became slang like random number gods. And Reaper here was telling us how that's based off like Dungeons and Dragons, where people would roll die to find outcomes. So we have fake worlds like, this is how forest fire fighting works. Then you create like a simulation and you train people to be able to code tools to automatically solve problems within such and such simulation. Here, like the other fake world, artificial world, which have nothing in common. This is saying like a lot of times with technology, the artificiality is you learn all the workings and stuff of a particular system, but the system operates differently from like the real world. Like I guess I'll just give an example. If I'm typing, right, does this teach me how to form the letters by hand for something? It's an entirely different action that I'm doing. So I guess I could learn how to spell words and stuff. Insofar it's like mental, I remember how to spell words. Then that's the same. But you probably all have met people that type very quickly on the computer, but then their handwriting sucks because it's just two entirely different things. And right, like I played these like typing speed games, just being a bug man. Oh, I was playing it in Russian earlier. So like for example, my Russian sucks. I can't really speak very much Russian, but like I could type in Russian. Like I could type in Russian probably faster than a lot of Russian people. Anyways, this is just like a live demo of the fact that you could have some technique like typing, and it's a very different thing from like writing or speaking or using a language, because you have the technology which transforms the problem. Am I going to do this for 22 more seconds? Alright, I'm doing it for entertainment value of the stream. Me talking about how I suck at actually using this language, but I could actually type it. So you could know how decoupled these two skills are. And you could choose to use your time better than me. So I typed at what would be the equivalent of 45 words per minute, talking while typing in Russian. But if you asked me to say much in Russian, I could hardly say anything. I could recognize a bunch of words, but I can't say very much. Okay, so artificiality, two worlds obey different imperatives, different objectives, different laws, which have nothing in common. So I would say too that another corollary of this is like you do some activity. Like I fell hard for the learn to code meme. Like I learned to code. I actually did what they told me to do. And when I like learned to code, then one thing I came to realize was, all right, I learned a lot about computer science, learned to code, but how does this knowledge actually map to the real world? How does this help me as a functioning member in human society? And like, you know, of course, like you could find a lot of jobs, for instance, coding. So then for, 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, whatever, then you're in your room and you're doing your coding in your cubicle. But then afterwards, then what do? So all your coding knowledge, maybe you know how to systematize to make systems more efficient given certain assumptions. But I suppose I'm saying, like, I was struck with the disconnect at how, like, stuff like mathematics, computer science, coding and stuff, how in many ways a lot of the stuff that I thought that I was learning, which might explain more about the world, I have found it surprisingly useless. Like, supposing all the computer programmers in the world, they just got hired with a similar amount of money to do something else. I'm curious to know how many of them would actually continue programming, or how many would just say, like, I hate programming, I'm stopping it. So I actually came to like a lot of programming quite a bit, but it seems maybe that's a minority situation. I don't know. Very interesting. All right, I'll continue. So artificiality, then contrasting like older eras with the current era, then especially we're coming up on stuff like Zuck's metaverse. Then clearly the metaverse is like a fake world of greater proportions than we have ever seen. So the metaverse is like huge fake, and there's no kidding about it. Like you have the fake world interface plastered on your face. So no question about that. Whereas if we look at medieval people or something, then clearly the techniques and stuff, they were not as immersive, whatever you want to call it. And there's probably like lots of aspects of daily life that didn't involve these highly specialized systems. Whereas like nowadays, I live in California, probably most people have a driver's license. Most adults of the age to drive, they have a driver's license. So even when you go out on the road, you go outside, there's stoplights. You're always interfacing with the system. It's always like technique stuff everywhere. And you have to like go to a technique-free zone, which would be like you drive far away, you park somewhere, and then you go on a hike to escape from technique land for a little bit. All right. So the next section, Jacques Ellul talks about characteristics, characterology, whatever you call it, of technique, is automatism. So here I have a quote. He says, when everything has been measured and calculated mathematically so that the method which has been decided upon is satisfactory from the rational point of view, and when from the practical point of view the method is manifestly the most efficient of all those hitherto employed or those competition with it, then the technical movement becomes self-directing. No human choice is involved. So these are my own notes. People just do what is most efficient. A machine could make these same decisions. So automatism, it's not referring to even like a computer itself, but like suppose you have an organization that has protocols. They have procedures for stuff. So such that even if the boss or the manager was out of work, if everybody knew those procedures, then they could assemble themselves, do the things, and maybe there would even be a new mechanism to put a new boss in place. I mean, we could even look like, for example, in the U.S. government, right? Like, there's a whole process. Like, if something happens to the president, then there's like the chain of who becomes president. If there's a legislature steps down, congressperson, then there's a procedure to have a new one. So in the past, like you go read about, I don't know, Mongolians or something, there's a lot of talk about who will succeed the throne, who will succeed the king, who will become the next Khan, all this sort of stuff. It's been very, very major in history for lots and lots of civilizations. But we see in the Ellul's time, so the mid-20th century, to our day and before then, following after the Middle Ages, is a lot of these systems coming in place which are kind of automatic in that they have procedures and things in place so that they could continue what they're doing, as opposed to like maybe you could call it more organic or personal methods by which a leader might be selected. Okay, second quote. Technique is advancing, eliminating every lesser force, and when it has received full satisfaction and accomplished its vocation, it will remain alone in the field. Technique thus reveals itself at once destroyer and creator, and no one wishes or is able to master it. So that reminds me again, once again, this Ouroboros beast that Reaper brought up at the beginning of the stream, the serpent that is eating its own tail. So if technique is so powerful, it will create like new techniques, create new ways of doing it, but then in that process, it will devour or destroy the older, less efficient ways of doing things until technique is all that remains in the field. And yeah, I don't know what to say to that besides in our own society, we could look at different areas, different fields, and look at the extent to which technique has become entrenched. So like one current thing a lot of people are talking about now is financial stuff and cryptocurrency, NFTs, all this sort of stuff. So if cryptocurrency becomes a thing, like I've mentioned, the central bank digital currency. So especially if stuff like the central bank digital currency becomes bigly, then what this could essentially mean is all of our financial policies for wherever this thing is being used, whether the United States or even globally, I don't know what's going to happen. It could be fully computerized. You could have the entire monetary policy driven by computers. And then what if you had a bunch of people who wrote like, let's write the infinite economic growth program, such that there will never be a stock market crash because we'll put in a control that if this happens, we freeze the stock price, and we could lock people's account at this time. There's no the possibilities are very, very many for what people could do with said technology. But in our current era, the computerization of everything is allowing technique to advance and to eliminate like all other alternative ways of doing things. And this includes like the political system as well. So if we have pretty high taxes, but then people require that you pay your taxes in a central bank digital currency, then you cannot just simply opt out of that system and say like, I'm just going to only use cash, or I'm only going to use like silver or something. Because if you want to have like a big house or do business with a lot of people or something, then you're basically sucked into that system. So that's how technique, one way in our modern world, through finance and this stuff, is becoming all encompassing. But we could look too and see like other fields. For example, education. How is technology spreading and characterizing all the education stuff, such that it seems like what is the purpose of education? Maybe a lot of people, like I know a lot of Asian Americans, it's like, you become a doctor or engineer or lawyer, which is basically a kind of technical operator within the system, like a skilled technical operator within the system, as opposed to, being a YouTube semi-neat stock trader. There's other options, but maybe generally not recommended to people. Okay. And then I think this might be the last point for today. Yeah, so this is still things that modern technique shares with technique of the past, like the Middle Ages, but it's a different matter of degree. So even in the past, like you could have, let's say, the baking guild or something. They might still have automation in their process, ways in which even if one person's out, they could still make sure they deliver the bread. They could have all this stuff. But with computers and things, then it takes a new height of technique. Let's look at this final point. Self-augmentation. So I'll read this quote. It says, at the present time, technique has arrived at such a point in its evolution that it is being transformed and is progressing almost without intervention by man. Modern men are so enthusiastic about technology, so assured of its superiority, so immersed in the technical milieu, that without exception they are oriented towards technical progress. So we could talk about like, how does technology grow itself? How does technology make itself bigger? Technique. How does technique make itself bigger? And this first point that Jacques Ellul made is that just modern people, we're just enthusiastic about technique. So in the previous section that we were talking about today, it was saying how medieval people, for instance, they might want to just work less and eat less. But in the West, the modern man, especially with things like hustle culture, we have phrases like work hard, play hard. Let's look at work hard, play hard. Oh, it's a Wiz Khalifa video. All right, we won't play too much of the song because we don't want to get copyright struck. Let's see if we could have a phrase by what it means. Urban Dictionary.
play hard, work hard, play hard, work.
Okay, that's enough. Let's look at a definition. All right, we got the snarky Urban Dictionary definition. Work hard, play hard. Attitude, often motto, present at many elitist or successful groups of people, especially at wealthy elite private schools, expensive highly ranked universities, and among yuppies, that is, young urban professionals. Basically means that one works hard at school or their job while they also party on the weekends, or weekdays as well, depending on how far they take it. Stupid because it basically provides an excuse for mindless partying, directing one's life without any space for taking anything seriously in the world. Sometimes leads to side effects like alcoholism, usually outgrown as one gets older. Right? Another definition, working hard at one's job, whether it's hustling or an actual job, so you have fun and party without any worries. So by good time, often, it's associated with partying in the sense of, drinking party, that sort of stuff. So maybe you work hard, you bring in a lot of money, and then you spend a lot of that money. And then, you go crazy, and then you pass out drunk, and you're like, oh, what a night to remember, that sort of stuff. This would go against a lot of, like, this Middle Ages sort of approach, which is, right, work less, don't work too much, don't tire yourself, wear yourself out unnecessarily, and eat less or drink less, right? Which should go with it. So let's see, why did I bring up work hard, play hard? Oh yeah, okay. So that was an example of self-augmentation, a way in which culturally self-augmentation happens. So like in our present era, I think associated with like work hard, play hard, you might look at a lot of these Silicon Valley type people, tech entrepreneur. A lot of people, they're aspire to really push the technology, to work late hours, and then to also try to have all these things that are supposed to be fun. So like Google, I think they got their famous slides, not like slideshow, on their campus. Yeah, so Google, they got all sorts of like, what is this? A kind of fake beach, some like goofy slide thing that you could go down. You could sit on those big letters. Some could try on different sunglasses. Oh yeah, here's the nerds going down the slides. You could play mini golf on the roof. So maybe all these examples would be things of like play hard. So you get obsessed with advancing the tech, and then they want to give you all these like little like amusements, entertainment thingies to keep you in that state, such that you could drive the technique, the development of technique. I mean, that's what a tech company is doing. At least a big tech company like Google, they're driving the technique. All right. Jacques Ellul mentions another thing as an interesting mechanism by which technique is improved through the self-augmentation property. Is the suggestion box. So I think his example is from like factories and stuff, where you might have like a little box, and then if there's like a problem at the factory, people could put in like a little note. They say like, oh, I don't know, the chair is too high, so it hurts my back. Can you give us lower chairs? Something like that. So I suppose if these things actually work, then that would be really cool. I think there's a general impression that like the suggestion box doesn't really get noticed. Nowadays with reviews and stuff, there's so much noise. The noise to signal ratio is quite bad. So it's hard for it to be, you gotta be experienced to know how to interpret those. But yeah, something like a suggestion box is an example of how you might even get like the employees, the people that are lower in the system, interested in doing something to improve the technique of the factory or wherever we're talking about. I wrote a note here myself, so maybe like a current manifestation of this is, right, you get Google, Facebook, all these parties that want to advance technique in terms of web programming or this sort of stuff. One thing that has really taken off is this idea of open source software. So a lot of times open source software is just people that write software. The really good skilled people that do this are like, I want this thing, but nobody else made it, so I have to make it myself. And then they might just share the work that they did with other people. But Google and Mozilla, Firefox, whoever you're talking about, have caught on to how this works, such that we had Google recently buy, so perhaps the most famous site, well-known site for open source software is GitHub. And Microsoft had bought this site. It's like for collaborative software building. And, right, a lot of companies, so you have all these big companies shown here, they're motivated for people to get into and build stuff on GitHub because it's like building the products that they themselves will be using. And even if it's not directly like you have some friends building a little project together and sharing their code, then all of this could be useful data for learning how people work together and build stuff. So anyways, that's just to say that open source software, I think, is like a technique ramped up version of the suggestion box mentioned here. All right, next quote by Jacques Ellul. He says, "The final point to make in discussing self-augmentation is that technique in its development poses primarily technical problems which consequently can be resolved only by technique." Okay, so how do I start talking about this one? Okay, it's like if you have a factory and the factory makes widgets, then what sort of suggestions would you make in talking about it? And it would have to do, like, you're constrained by the model that you're working with. So if you're measuring the success of a factory by how many widgets it produces, then it's like the only thing you could talk about with the factory would be like its widget production. I think that might be one way to say it. In its development poses primarily technical problems which consequently can be resolved only by technique. Yeah, so I think oftentimes you try to make a system, problems beget new problems. Like, I'll just use an example from software. With software, one common question people that are starting to ask is like, which programming language should I learn? Something like that. You really don't have to decide very much on that. Pretty soon, if you start building projects and stuff, somebody will tell you which one to use, and then you won't have to make any more choices. Or you could just go with what you like. But you could ask the question, why are there so many programming languages? Why haven't people agreed on some standards? So on and so forth, that sort of question. And I think that the answer is that we have a lot of technical problems that could only be resolved from technical problems. So we have this never-ending cycle by which technical problems make more technical problems to be solved by technical problems. And yes, current modern software development is an interesting expression of this. Whereby, well, like for example, I was talking about this program I'm using here called Vim. It's like a text editor. So this itself is like a program, right? You use it to edit text, and somebody might like write or edit or work on somebody else's text editor from within a text editor. So it's like you use software to solve problems in software. And then you could talk endlessly about software and software problems. Cool. Okay, Kekma says going to sleep, but I may leave the live stream on. All right, thanks for joining. Rest well. Okay, continuing. A couple more quotes. We have, quote here, in the future, man will apparently be confined to the role of a recording device. He will note the effects of techniques upon one another and register the results. I think this is going further, talking about how one of the goals of the machine is for there to be less and less work. Like washing machines, good example, right? You aren't washing clothes by scrubbing them on the washing board, whatever. Instead, you put them in the machine and then you press the button and then it goes swish, swish, swish. So what is the next step after a washing machine? Like, what if you don't even have to pick up your clothes and go over and walk over to the washing machine, but you have your Alexa washing basket transporter? Then you just have like your pile of your dirty laundry, and then you don't even walk over to the laundry machine because you have a machine that does it. So some person had to like make a program to train the thing to do the operation that you want it to do. But then at the end of the day, right, there's like less movement, less action needed from you in a bodily sense. So this Jacques Ellul quote, in the future, man will apparently be confined to the role of a recording device. Yeah, what will that mean? It's just like you have all these processes that are automated by technique around you, and you could like check on the status of things, like make note, record things, maybe put in an order for something else to be done. But if the techniques are really in place, then it's like, what is there left for you to do? I'll just give an example I just thought up. Like you could even think about like decades ago, it used to be very common for people to like have music collections, whether it was on physical media like CDs or cassettes, or the tech savvy people might find ways to like make their own mixtapes or burn their own CDs, things like that. So this was like early 2000s type stuff. But even before then, using whatever tech was available, people would do this sort of thing. Now look at all these music subscription type services. Like sure, people make playlists and things, but a lot of people have outsourced that as to other people, such that you aren't even going out and collecting and copying and doing all this action that's involved with like music or media, this sort of thing. On the other hand, what you see is you as a person, you just, I guess you monitor the results. You just might be like, oh, I listened to 200 hours of Spotify this month. That was a lot of Spotify. I really made use of my subscription. Something like that, I think, would be a common reaction of a person using these services. It's just like they use the service. It's a service. And then, you might check up every once in a while to see if you still want to use the service. But once again, this is going into self-augmentation with technique to say, right, first it might be that streaming service, right, it automates your music. Then you might even have that when you play the streaming service itself, that becomes automated. So I don't know, I don't own a Tesla, but probably with like a Tesla or one of these like high-tech type cars, you could probably have some setting where you step in the car and then it will play certain music or it will do certain things, right? Like it will play your streaming service, or like with the smart home, right? So first step was to get that initial sign up with that service, to get it to know your preferences, whether that took some manual programming by you, like selecting keywords and doing that sort of stuff. Then the next step is like an automatic playing of that service, whether in your car, your smart home, whatever. So that was interesting. Self-augmentation, how these systems lead you to further systematize, to expand technique in your world. And then finally, this point, technique is organized as a closed world. It utilizes what the mass of men do not understand. It is even based on human ignorance. Oof. Okay, let me pull up an appropriate image. Could look at a monolith. What is it? What's going on inside there? What's in the monolith? It's just a big slab. I think in movies, yeah, there's a lot of monoliths in various films. Oh, it looks like there's a film called Monolith. Not what I wanted to see. I want to just see like robot-looking things that look like monoliths. I think in like a lot of sci-fi, you'll see this sort of imagery. Anyways, in terms of the closed world sort of thing, I bring up this monolith image because it's about a... Well, it's a thing. You can't see the inside of it. It's just how it works. It's very opaque. So you could know techniques. You could know how to operate something. But the machinations of it, you don't know. Actually, even like a computer terminal. Computer terminal is a good image. It's a good, appropriate way to understand this. So you have like a computer terminal. How does it work? Well, all the electronics and the physical aspects of this is all abstracted from the user. You don't see little sparks of electricity and stuff. Rather, you interface through text. And this thing is like, it's a closed world because like in here is in the machine is all this self-contained logic, and the way you interface with it is through the keyboard. And stuff appears, and you don't necessarily know how stuff works, but you know the rules by which you could participate in this particular system. So I think that modern computers too, like same exact thing of this, just, they invented dark mode. They invented dark mode before the millennial generation caught on to dark mode. But the idea, is like a closed system where a lot of it is opaque. You do not know how everything works, yet you interface with the system. But we could look at how this is not exclusive to technology or to like computer tech, digital tech. Like even in the past, let's just say that you're working at a bakery and your particular position is like to knead the dough to do something specific. Now, if they actually put you in like a physically different room than say like where the ovens and stuff are, let's just pretend you do your job. You don't really try to find out more, ask anything. If the boss there wanted you to just every single day go in and do the exact same thing, I don't know. Maybe that is what you would end up doing, where you might work like a decade at a bakery, and then you might not even know like the majority of what goes on in the bakery because you only understand that little place in which you have permission to do a little thing. So yes, technique is organized as a closed world. It utilizes what the mass of men do not understand. So oftentimes, like the mass of men, most people participating in these in the technique world, technique system, like very few people would look at Jacques Ellul. I mean, I hadn't. That's why we're looking at it now, right? We're all looking at this book, reading about how the technological society works. But, like, yeah, I think it would be safe to say that most people live their lives and would not look at these topics or look at how the system works, right? Especially if you're just worried, concerned day to day, paycheck to paycheck about what's happening out there, then, you're probably not going to jump into looking at what the machinations of power are like or something like that. But yes, that's, among other things, that's the topic that we're looking at here. Cool. So I think that's enough Jacques Ellul directly for today. Next stream, I think I'll look at these topics, which I'll have to look into a little bit more. These are the aspects of technique that Jacques Ellul, I think, is saying are particular to his era and beyond, or the Industrial Revolution and beyond. So that would be monism, universalism, and autonomy. And that'll be picking up around page 93. So we could take a look at that. And yeah, I think that about does it for the topics I had here. I'll wait a couple more minutes, see if anybody has anything to type in the chat that you would like to discuss. Otherwise, we have been streaming for quite a while now, and we have covered a lot of ground. Looking at coding, looking at the Middle Ages and the goals that people have had versus what modern people are doing. So oftentimes it seems that it's not that people from these past eras were superstitious or stupid, or these are oftentimes the dismissive attitudes that I have been presented with about people of different ages, of different places. Say, we're the best now. Look at how advanced our technology is, and so on and so forth. This is often the narrative that we're presented with. But you take a step back and say, like, look, why don't we hear what the people from the Middle Ages have to say? And then you might find that, the reason that you have better, more efficient technology than them is because they weren't even trying to make their technology more efficient. So that's just saying, like, I'm better at, well, I'll give a personal anecdote. Like, in my childhood, one of the things that I learned how to do was to juggle. And, just take a sample of 10 people from my grade school or whatever, I would probably be the best juggler. Why? Was it because I was great at juggling? It's like, no, just because nobody else juggled. They had other things to do. Yes, that's to say, like, if a modern person is like, haha, I'm the best juggler. Well, if you're just trying to do something that nobody else cared to do before, then it doesn't really mean anything except that you spent your time doing something that, maybe it's no good to do. Maybe it's a waste of time. Oh, this too directly relates to the melancholy and subculture article that we were looking at in a previous stream. Reaper says, you're presenting historical times as if they didn't want progress, but many of those people weren't living great lives. They were serfs or otherwise not doing great. No, Reaper, I'm not like saying that they had easy lives or anything like that, or it's like, oh yeah, let's just return to nature. If everybody was like, living in fields and we all did organic agriculture, everything would be fine. I mean, this is not an anti-technology stream or channel, right? We're looking at how stuff has developed, but this is to say, like, we could look at the different character of struggles that people have had, right? So let's think of an example. Okay, Reaper says you're kind of invoking a noble savage / farmer sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, I could understand this criticism here. I would say no. I think, okay, I'll put it like this. The like this technological society talking about modern man, right? This is a particular climate that a person is born into, and they didn't choose it, right? So, and then similarly, like the medieval person, they're born into a time and a place that they didn't choose themselves either. So neither of them is like superior or more noble in that regard, and that everyone just has to work with what they're given. What I'm saying is, if as modern people, though, we're looking back at people from different eras or different places and feeling superior, then I don't think it's right to feel superior. Likewise, though, I would say for them, if like a middle-aged person was looking down and criticizing the technological society, then it would not be right too for them to feel superior. Rather, it would be like if you know better and you see somebody that is suffering, it's like, oh man, they're missing out on this important insight, this valuable thing, because they're too caught up in something. How would I help them? So all I'm trying to say is that maybe in some ways these like people in the Middle Ages, different types of places, that they have a lot of wisdom and understanding that we could learn from. And I'm saying that like in my own life, the sort of attitude that I was inculcated with was, oh yeah, these people from these past eras, they're kind of superstitious, but we're beyond that now. But we take a closer look and try to understand like where they came from, then I think there's a lot we could learn from them. Let's see. Reaper says, we don't have to feel superior per se, but we're far more advanced, even to the extent that if we want to, quote, go back to nature, we know what that means more. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with hierarchy and expertise and knowing more. Channel your inner JP, meaning Jordan Peterson. Yeah, okay, Reaper. Oh man, you're hitting those deep topics again. So, like looking now, we're getting into advanced history, big brain topics. So, we'll have to revisit these. But looking, for example, about we're far more advanced. You could think of us like down the timeline, right? We have a longer written recorded history. Like, let's just assume that. I'm gonna assume that they didn't have more books and then their library got burnt down. Let's just, for the sake of argument, say that we as modern people with the internet and stuff, we have the potential to have a longer historical view and to consider a greater diversity or broad range of things than like most people in the Middle Ages did. Like, we're talking with people all around the world, even on this very small YouTube channel. So I think that is, that's just telling of the power of what this technique could do. So we are advanced in many ways. We could think about transportation, right? You could take airplanes to places. You could take trains, go further. You could go faster. That is all true, right? But it's almost like we have a kind of bitter knowledge because we have walked and done so many different destructive things to like ourselves. And I'm going to sound a little bit hippy-dippy here, and the planet Earth and the environment that like people in the Middle Ages, they did not even have the chance to do. And going to like the Industrial Revolution and stuff, right? Like, you could only chop down so many forests with like, axes doing it yourself. You could only do so much. But then like with modern technology, then suddenly, we have the power, and unfortunately we have the experience of knowing how much damage certain things could do because we actually did it. And I think a lot of the times, right, as modern people, so if I sounded kind of like anti-technology or something, I totally understand why that might come off. And Reaper makes like a comment, I'm using this Vim, this line editor. So it's like, for all of the technology in our century, why would I be using a program like this? And it was kind of going along like what Jacques Ellul was saying about where is it, about mastery of tools or something. It's like, it's just a comfortable editor to me. Yeah, here, this thing, like this sort of vibe. I like the deficiency of the tool was to be compensated for by the skill of the worker. Until the 18th century, all societies were primarily oriented towards improvement in the use of tools, and were little concerned with the tools themselves. So it's like, sure, this thing, like, admittedly, it might make typing hard. Like, I made a bunch of typos, even in this stream, looking at this thing. If I just, like, upgraded my tooling a little bit and had, like, a spell checker and some other things, you know, maybe that would actually be more convenient. And actually, at the beginning, actually at the beginning of the stream, like, I pulled up this program, LibreOffice, which I do use. Like, I do use, like, a normal word processor a lot of the time, as well as using ancient line editors. And you could ask, like, why even use the ancient text editor? Why not just use, like, all the things with the more modern one? I don't know. Maybe, yeah, it's just modern people stuff. There's just too many techniques, dude. Techniques here, techniques there. Too many techniques. Okay, Reaper says, probably ancient civilizations destroyed the environment, i.e. Middle East, Mesopotamia was the Garden of Eden, lush green stuff. It was over-farmed and turned to the desert. Yeah, also, too, that I think it could be a good point that we should not assume, too, that people of the past were able to do bad things at scale like we witness today. I think one, like, a clear example of that is, like, in the United States, I think the Civil War was where the most Americans were killed. So, you know, even prior to having machine guns and a lot of stuff, and that's just, like, American history, which is relatively short compared to just world history broadly. It's like, it's wrong if we just fixate on, oh yeah, if we just ban all the guns or something, that will solve all the problems. That would be to take a naive view of how stuff works. Likewise, if you were to say, let's ban all the gasoline cars, that'll solve all the environmental problems. Well, it's like, well, dude, what about toxic battery waste and stuff? There's all sorts of ways in which, even if we had no gas cars, you know, pollution doesn't vanish. Okay, Reaper has one more example. He says, also Easter Island clear-cut the island for those stone monoliths, then destroyed their civilization because no forests. Oh, yeah, that would be... This is what the emoji is called. I don't know if... yeah. This, these guys. Which the meme people have had a good time photo editing. Yes, what if you made these things, but then everyone on your island and your civilization died? What would that mean? All right, cool. Well, I think it's been a good stream. Thanks everyone for joining. I think we got a bunch of big brain topics coming up. I think continuing Jacques Ellul sounds good. We'll talk about monism, universalism, and autonomy, as they are characteristics of modern technique. And I'm sure a lot of topics, metaverse and otherwise, will come up. Oh, Reaper says the argument is ancient people killed too many animals, and then we had to start cultivating grain. Alright, this guy is trying to sell us the ketogenic diet or something. We got to get out of here before these advertisers take over the stream. So, thanks everybody for joining, and I hope to see many of you next time. Do all the YouTube stuff, tell a friend, and we'll see you all later.